This seminar is The Birds and the Bees, your child's path towards learning about sexuality and where babies come from. The seminar is not made for one age child in particular, because your children, regardless of how old they are going to need this seminar, whether they're 4 years old, 7-year-olds, 10-year-olds. You're going to hear the information today and store it up. You may need to use those scripts right away, or you'll be using it one day in the future. But for sure, you need it. So let's get started. Talking about sex is a topic that makes all parents a little bit nervous. Even the most chatty ones get a little bit nervous when talking about sex. No one is completely comfortable talking about this topic, and it's kind of funny because this is one of the only things that all human beings share and enjoy, hopefully. And yet it's the one topic that parents have a really tricky time with. It triggers something in all of us. So I want to start by telling you how important your tone is when you have this conversation with your kids. The way you speak to your kids will reflect your own feeling about this topic. And the words that you choose to use and the scripts that you use in having that conversation are going to be reflective of you, your experience, your growing up, and what your parents told you. It's going to be different for each person, that's for sure. Even in a family, husband and wife, it could be different. But when you stop and think about it, it's the way you present it, your words, your tone, your affect, that's going to be the most powerful part of this conversation. So let me start by asking you to stop and ask yourself, who did you learn about sex from? Did you learn from your parents? Did you learn it from friends at school? Did you learn it on the playground? Did you learn it from whispers and titters and stuff like that? Because you have a choice about how your children are going to learn about it. Gone are the days when parents really don't talk about sex and sexuality and birds and the bees. Here are the days when parents do make a conscious effort to discuss with their children about all the things that they want them to know in your time and from your mouth. So, thinking about your attitude and your openness is the first part of this. If this is a topic that's loaded for you, I can promise you it will become loaded for your kids. I want to say one more word about the way you present these conversations with your children. You just might need to practice some of the things that you're going to say. Because for some parents, words like penis and vagina and sperm and ovum and uterus just fall off their tongues. And for others, it gets a little bit caught in their throats. So you might have to talk with your partner, with your spouse, with your mother, with your friends, and talk about how you want to say the words you want to say so that when you do have the conversation with your kids, it won't come out like you have something stuck in your throat. We live in very different times, don't we? It's not at all like the times when I grew up with Harriet and Ozzie and Harriet. You're too young to remember this television show, but Harriet wore a little peignoir and Ozzie had his PJs that buttoned, and they slept in twin beds in the same room. Well, I don't think kids today are exposed to those kinds of relationships with parents anymore. Times have really changed. The internet and the media have exposed everyone to sex and sexuality at much earlier ages than certainly I was exposed to it. Kids today are learning much younger, they're learning much more, they're learning in many different places. So, and they're learning from siblings who are learning in many different places. And from their friends who have siblings who are learning in many different places. So actually, when your child should begin to learn about this may or may not be your choice. And that's why we're doing this seminar, because you may need to be having this conversation with your child very much younger than you think you do. So, at what age should you have this conversation? Well, I'm happy to tell you that there really is no one age for sure when you should start talking about this. I can only tell you that if your child is older than 7 and he hasn't talked with you about where babies come from, you're late. Some kids will start asking where babies come from very early, as young as 2.5, 3, 3.5. If they're with someone who's pregnant, they're going to want to know where that big bump came on mommy's body. Some kids who are living with a family member who is pregnant may ask that question earlier. Some kids won't ask it at all. So here's what I think. If a child reaches the age of 6, 6.5, and has not yet commented about or asked, where did babies come from, or how did that baby get in her body, it's time for you to bring it up. Parents always ask, how do I bring that up? Yikes, this is a scary topic. What do I say? This is when the scripts come in. A great idea is to bring it up by saying to your child, so, you've never asked me where babies come from. If you ever wonder that, I'm the one who can give you the answer. And a good place to do that is likely in the car or when you're on a walk, because you're not sitting face to face and you don't have to look like something horrible is about to happen. So that's a good time. And it's a good age. I once had a client in a seminar who came up to me after the seminar was over. It was this seminar, Birds and Bees. And she announced to me in a very definitive voice, my daughter is 10 years old. She has never asked where babies come from, and I'm never going to tell her. And she said it to me in such a way that I knew I shouldn't really make any kind of a comment. So I said, oh, is there a reason? And she said, because I don't want my daughter to have sex before she's married. And trying my best to hold a straight face, my reply was, I wish that you had a hand in that. Chances are, in this day and age, that won't be the case. But I can tell you for sure, not talking to your child about it is not going to prevent her either from having sex or from learning about it. It's really important that you have this conversation with your kids. There are two important facts that you need to understand as we begin this conversation. The first is, children are inherently sexual. That makes some people feel uncomfortable, but it is the truth. Babies come into this world equipped with all of the parts they're going to need to make babies and to be sexual. Their sexuality, all children's sexuality, will develop regardless of what you do and what you say, because sexuality is something that develops naturally over time, regardless of what you want or what you may say. It certainly isn't switched on by one switch at puberty that suddenly lights a fire and everything happens. Not at all the case. It is something that unfolds over time, and all the parts and all the feelings are on hand at birth, just like the child's genitals are on hand at birth, sometimes in hand at birth. Little boys get erections, and they like to handle their penises. And little girls have vulvas, and they like to touch themselves, and they lubricate from a very early age. Toddlers will explore their bodies. In fact, toddlers love to be naked, and they're exuberantly naked and love touching their bodies and showing their bodies off. All of this stuff is so natural, and yet it's sometimes really hard for parents to take and to accept. But I'm telling you this so you understand that this is perfectly natural, and it's part of nature's way of helping children to become healthily sexual kids. The second thing that you need to know is that children will get messages about sex from the world, from most places where they visit. Isn't it better for them to get the whole story from you, the whole real story from you, before they get it from the playground, from peers, or from the media? Don't you want your child to know that you're the person she can come to ask you questions and that you'll tell her the real answer? Reminds me of a parent who is a client of mine whose 5-year-old daughter came to her just recently and asked her, Mommy, what's a blowjob? How about that for a question? Fortunately, this mom had taken my seminar and at least knew, not the exact words, but knew not to be shocked or horrified by the question. It is going to happen. I want to add something here that's important when we go back to when is the right age to talk to kids about sexuality and where babies come from. In previous seminars I've mentioned, so I'll mention again, that 4 years old is the age of questions. And it's an age when children will ask all kinds of questions about death, about sex, about God, about money. They ask lots of questions. So it's not uncommon for these questions to begin to come up at 4 years old. I forgot to mention that before. There are several basic elements in every human being, every child, that will grow and combine to form her sexuality and his sexuality. I'm going to read from my list now so I get them all in. Those basic elements, and in this order, are spontaneous genital arousal, pleasurable genital stimulation, exploratory sex play, fantasies about having sex or about bodies, maturing ability to love, and a human being's, teenagers, young adults' ability to understand intimacy and relationships. Now, hearing all of this stuff sometimes makes a parent gulp and feel uncomfortable. Because honestly, it's kind of hard to imagine your child being a sexual person, isn't it? It certainly was for me. And in fact, I have ex-students who come back to see me as a specialist for their own students. And they'll sit on the couch and we'll be talking about their families or their babies or what's going on. And I'll look at this once 5-year-old boy, now 40-year-old man, and I think, oh my gosh, are you having sex? Because I'm still thinking of him as a 5-year-old boy. It's amazing to me, and I'm sure it's amazing to you. So, we've now established that with or without your intervention, your child is going to become a sexual person. So wouldn't you rather have a hand in this aspect of your child's development than not? Don't you want your child to come to you with questions? Don't you want to influence his decisions, his knowledge, his understanding of all of this? Of course you do. In fact, there's evidence that shows us that you as a parent can play a role in not only delaying the age of your child's sexual initiation, but also in improving the chances that your children will use birth control, boys with condoms, girls with pills and the like, that parents, your involvement can limit the number of sexual partners your children will have. The point is that teaching about sexuality is, once again, about parenting. You do have a role. You need to play that role. So, as a child learns about sexuality, she needs to have 4 things. She needs to have, number 1, a reasonable person to talk to. She needs to hear the biological facts of the matter. She needs to have steady emotional surroundings. And she needs to have parents whose response to her emerging sexuality is not anxious or puritanical or punishing, but rather a response that is accepting and educational and warm and helpful. Please keep that one in mind more than all the others. So, there are 2 lessons here. Number 1, we're going to talk about how babies are made. Literally, what's the basic recipe? Where do babies come from? And number 2, we got to talk about children learning about sex, about the actions and about the behaviors that surround sex. They are going to learn about both of these. Let's hope you're the one who's going to give them tremendous help in that education. Regarding number 1, learning how babies are made. No matter how it happens, even in this age of advanced medical technologies, babies are still made the same way with the basic recipe, the ingredients of which are part from a female and part from a male. Whether you're a worm, a tree, a zebra, whether you live in Sri Lanka or Timbuktu, it is all the same. There is the basic recipe, and we're going to get to that. But the second thing is a little bit more tricky, the part about sex and sexual behaviors that aren't necessarily at all about making babies. We live in really different times. I've said that twice. I'll keep saying it because I feel the change just from when my children, who were 38, were growing up. These are different times. Kids are having sex younger and younger. They're hearing about sex younger and younger. And Unfortunately, sex as an activity for some is becoming recreation. That didn't used to happen, but it is an activity that kids do for entertainment, which I believe is heartbreaking and needs to be addressed. You, parents, you are involved in shaping your children's behaviors and attitudes about both these things I just mentioned. So let's talk about sex education for starters. Like all learning, sex education has a degree of scaffolding to it. It's about something being built upon something else and something else and something else. When our children are very young, 4s, 5s, 6s, we want to make sure that we're telling them just a little bit and what they need to hear from the very beginning. But that education begins before you even have to say anything, because the truth of the matter is sex education begins at birth. Children get messages about their bodies from us. They get messages about their parts and the products that come out of them from a very early age. When we hold that baby and we nuzzle him next to us and nosy into his neck, he's getting a message about bodies and touching and what feels good and about closeness. When we scrunch up our noses when we're changing their diapers and we go, ooh, stinky poopy, we're giving him a pretty clear message about the okayness or the not okayness of things that come out of his body. You can decide if that's okay or if that's not okay, but my point here is that children begin learning about sexuality, which is bodies, from a very early age, and we're projecting our attitudes about that from the very start. It's our job to educate our children and to give them cues about how to feel about themselves and their bodies, the things that come out of their bodies. So, what can you do as a parent? Let's start with a few hints already. From the very beginning, I implore you to use real names for real body parts. I continue to be amazed at how parents have a hard time saying penis, vagina, testicles, vulva, clitoris, breast. They say words like hoo-hoo and your coochie and your foofy and your titty and your boobie. They use these kind of cutesy pretend words for things that are just plain old body parts. And using cutesy words really gives kids the message that there's something different and forbidden about those parts. You know that song, head, shoulders, knees and toes, knees and toes? We don't say headsies, toesies, kneesies and toes. You know, we don't say shouldersies. We give them their real names. And yet we would say boobies, coochies, woo-woos, wee-wees. We use all these funny words for our body parts. So we want to narrate and talk about our kids' body parts openly and comfortably from the very beginning. By the way, I read an interesting fact, this is amazing, that with young children across the country, a study was done, I can't give you a better quote than that, where they found that 60% of children who knew words for the male body part, who knew penises, did not have a word for the female genital. They didn't know vagina. And were using words as crazy as front tushy or woo-woo, I'm not kidding, for girls' body parts. I don't know why you have trouble with vagina. What's going on with that? Well, that's not my problem today. So that's our first lesson. Second thing I want to talk to you about is about kids' feelings about their body parts. 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds in particular, are absolutely exuberant about their bodies. They're enthusiastic huggers and kissers and cuddlers and kiss blowers and masturbators and naked runners. They love their bodies. They love to be free and be naked. And if we are uncomfortable about that, it's going to give them a very clear message about what's okay and what's not okay about their bodies. Rather, we should be giving them lessons about when and where they can be exuberantly, enthusiastically naked and blowing kisses and touching their bodies. Remember, we're giving them messages about what's okay and what isn't all the time. So it is your job as a parent to teach your children what is okay and what is appropriate under what circumstances. We need to teach our kids where and when they can touch their private body parts. Because even if you don't want them to touch their private body parts because you have some issue with that, your children are still going to do it. Why? Because it feels good. Who can touch your child's body parts? That's our first lesson, and your children need to learn from a very young age, and I'm talking about 15 months, 2 years old, that he may touch his body parts, mommy and daddy may touch his body parts, the doctor may. Nobody else can touch your private body parts. That it is only okay for those people to touch them, and we give very clear, strong messages about them. The purpose of this is not so much about sex education in this case, but it is about educating our children for safety and child sexual abuse. That's a whole different seminar. You'll get that later. Our kids need to learn that just like we make our pees in certain places and our poops in certain places, there are certain places where we can touch our body parts, our genitals, and there are certain places that we can't. So we might say to a child who is handling himself in public, I know it feels good to touch your body, I know it feels good to touch your penis, but that's something that we do in private. You could do that in the bathroom, or you could do it in your bedroom, or when you're private. Using the example, we don't come out and pee in the living room, do we? In the same way, you do that in private. Not doing it with any kind of an attitude or tone like something's bad, but just teaching him the where and the when. There's nothing wrong with touching your genitals. There's nothing wrong with touching your parts. The point is where it's okay to do that. We need to teach our kids about privacy, both your privacy and his privacy. Teaching your kids about this is critical because it walks hand in hand with learning the where and when. So from an early age, we start using the word private. When you go in the bathroom and you want some privacy, and by the way, I realize that probably hasn't happened in years, and it may not happen for years, but it doesn't mean you're not going to put forth the effort of saying, I would like some privacy. I want to be by myself. You can ask your children to knock on the door when you're in the bathroom. I'm not saying it will keep them out, but we're teaching them about privacy. Likewise, you need to show your children respect by knocking on the door when they're in the bathroom or asking, may I come in? So we're teaching them the importance of privacy. We're teaching them that they deserve privacy, and certainly that you deserve privacy too. If you respect your children's boundaries, they will learn not only to respect your boundaries, but to emphasize their own boundaries. And that again is another lesson in safety for all children. As kids get older, we want to give them more power over their own bodies. So, when they're in the bathtub, for example, once a child gets to be 2.5 years old, that child should be washing her own body. You give her the soapy sponge and you have her wash her body and wash her genitals herself and wash her tushy. They get beyond the age when somebody else should be doing them. We want them to feel good about their bodies, we want them to have power over their bodies, and we want them to practice not allowing other people to touch their bodies. Here is a hard one. We want our children to learn that if they don't feel like kissing someone, they don't have to. The reason this is a hard lesson is because most people's parents, grandma and grandpa, have a hard time learning this lesson. What? I'm your grandma, give me a kiss, come, give me a kiss. But in the service of teaching children, of giving children power over their bodies, we need them to be the bosses of their kisses and their hugs. And so we need to help our parents to understand that as a safety lesson and in learning about their bodies, we're not taking kisses and hugs, we're asking for them. Every grandparent alive, including me, wants to support our adult kids when they want to help to keep their children safe from child sexual abuse. So we say to grandma and grandpa, why don't you say, may I give you a kiss, instead of give me a kiss? The point is, we want our kids to know it's okay to say no to people. It teaches them to pay attention to their own needs and their own desires, which is also part of sexuality. It teaches them and they will learn not to let someone else move in and overwhelm him. You're going to need a script and an explanation for your own parents, as I said, who are likely to be offended. But honestly, this is about protecting your own child, and I think that should have priority over your parents' feelings. And I'm a grandma, I'm saying that too. So as we teach kids about sexuality and where babies come from, we're going to teach them by example. That doesn't mean what I think you think it means. You're not going to show them how to have sex, and you're certainly not going to show them your body parts. But what you are going to do is model showing respect for yourself and asking for privacy, maybe when you're making a poop or maybe in the bath, is one of the ways that you show respect for yourself. It's also respectful to ask your children not to touch your body parts. Now, I know that sounds obvious, but I do have parents who come to me and talk about how their children want to touch their body parts. Daddies will say that children want to touch their penises because, face it, little girls don't get to see men's penises. They mainly see little boy penises at nursery school, which, in case you haven't noticed, bear no resemblance to men's penises. It's like a whole different body part. So they want to touch. Little boys want to touch mommy's breasts. Little girls want to touch mommy's breasts. I'm giving you permission to say to your child, this is my body. It is my private body. I don't want you to touch it. I think it's a wonderful model for kids, and you should take it into consideration. You also have an opportunity to show your children examples of love in action. Now, we haven't really gotten to this part of the sexuality talk yet, and we will. But showing children love in action, love in operation, means kissing and hugging and pats on the tuchus and giving kind words and expressions of kindness with your adult partner. Children, in order to grow and understand sexuality and love, because sexuality should be about love making and not entertainment and recreation, if you ask me, you have to show them about relationships, because as we'll discuss later, sexuality really is, love really is about people and about relationships. But they need to see people showing love. They need to see mommy walking in the door and planting a kiss on daddy's cheek. They need to see daddy coming home and giving mommy a Marilyn Monroe kiss. They need to see hugs and kisses and patch on the tuchus and all of those kinds of things in order for them to understand why mommy and daddy, adult men and women, express their love sexually and what that expression is. So sexuality, because it is about relationships, is about how adults treat one another in the home. When I have my seminar, Birds and the Bees, with a group of parents, I always begin it by asking the parents, in what room of the house do you believe your children learn about sex? And yes, this is a trick question. And inevitably, the first answer is the bathroom, because that's where kids are naked and taking baths and peeing. And then the next choice is the bedroom. But the answer to this question is, wait for it, you ready? The kitchen. Why do I say that? Because the kitchen in every family is where life happens. And where life happens is where children see people interacting and expressing their feelings about one another and showing their relationship. And again, sex is an expression of a relationship. And if your children are witnessing a loveless, cold relationship that has no intimacy in terms of touching and caring words, then they're really not going to see what the connection is between expressing love, kissing, and sexuality. So that's another way in which we model. I do believe that affection is the best context for learning about sexuality. Raising sexually healthy children is not unlike raising healthy children in general. It's really not much different. We need to teach our children all about themselves and all about their bodies. One of the things we teach them is each child has only one body. This is the only body you have, and this is your body to take care of for the whole rest of your life. You are never going to have another body. And we take care of it in many ways, by keeping it clean, by eating well, by keeping fit, by clothing ourselves properly, by clothing ourselves properly in the weather, except that's an issue that I don't want to go into right now because I don't want you to go home and tell your daughter she has to wear a jacket when it's cold. Different seminar. But you understand what I mean. We're helping our kids to understand that this is their one body and they better take good care of it by respecting it. And that's what I'm talking about. It also means that children need to learn to respect other people's bodies too. You model that by respecting their bodies and your body. They have to learn to respect other people's bodies by learning that it's not okay to hit, that it's not okay to handle other people's genitals or other people's bodies any more than it's okay for them to do it to someone else. Nobody can touch their body. The child needs to learn that it is he who controls how other people react, touch, treat his body, and it is she who controls how other people touch, react, involve her body. She is the boss of her body, he is the boss of his body. Now we're going to talk about masturbation. I know you didn't ask to talk about it, but you need to hear about it. Why? Because most children will masturbate. It's totally normal. And most parents are a little bit uncomfortable when it comes to talking about masturbation. Go figure. Most adults masturbated when they were younger, when they were children. Many adults masturbated when they were teens, and many adults continue to masturbate. Isn't it funny that something that is so common is something that is hard for parents to talk about which they feel embarrassed, like you're not supposed to be doing it? But I'm here to tell you, masturbation is completely normal, whether you're an adult or a child. When we're talking about kids, we're not talking about masturbation the way you talk about masturbation, because with young children, we're not talking about a child coming to climax. We're talking about, when we refer to masturbation, a young child who may put his hands in his pants, a little girl who may have her hands in her pants at circle time, or when she's just sitting still, or when she's doing her homework, or whatever. This is a child who handles himself, his genitals, her genitals, inside or outside her pants. The message about masturbation that we want to give our kids totally depends on you and your feelings about it and your history with it. So you need to get in touch, no pun, you need to get in touch with your own feelings about masturbation. Your child will know when you're being a hypocrite or when you're being insincere. Because if you're not comfortable with masturbation, you're not going to be able to say to your child, okay, it's okay to do that, but just be sure you wash your hands first, or whatever it is you say in a way that's so indicative of your lack of comfort. So you need to explore this one. If you're not comfortable with masturbation and give your child that message, I'm here to tell you it will not at all necessarily stop the behavior. Here's the deal. People do what feels good. Period. End of story. We don't want to make our kids feel guilty about masturbating. We don't want to make our kids feel guilty about doing something that she thinks she's not supposed to be doing, but that feels really good. Some kids are masturbators at a very early age. Very early. I'm talking 15, 18 months old. Sometimes we see little girl nursery schoolers at school on the floor gyrating on top of the head of one of their little dollies, because you know sometimes our dolls have hard rubber heads, and I'm actually telling you something I used to see when I was a nursery school teacher and director, because a doll is beneath her and it feels good and it rubs her in just the right place. Sometimes I would see a child who would just be sitting at circle time quietly on the rug, maybe with both legs up with one hand in his pants or her pants. So what do we do about that? Because we know it is normal, but remember what we're trying to do is teach children where and when. Not to or not to, but where or when. So at a very early age, if your child is really little, like a year-old baby or so, and you feel that the masturbating is excessive, it's a good idea maybe to distract the child and introduce something else to do. Because sometimes it's out of boredom with very young children. After the child, however, is old enough to have been learning about privacy, and remember we talked about that happens somewhere in the 2 to 2.5-year-old range, we introduce the concept of touching yourself in private. And we say to the child, I know it feels really good to touch your vagina. And that's something that you can do in private. I've already said that before. And here's a script that I'll give you. I'll read it slowly from my notes in case you want to write it down. I know it feels good to handle your private parts. That's something you can do in your own room or in your bathroom. You can continue with, just like people make their pees and poops in private, so they touch their private parts in private too. And that will be that. I hope this helps with the masturbating thing. Okay, now let's talk about nudity. Yep, you didn't ask for this one, but parents always ask me, so I thought I would throw it in. Remember before I said that 2-year-olds are exuberantly naked, enthusiastically nude, they love to be nude? Well, all children love to be nude, and most children like to see other people nude. But here's the reality. Regardless of what they enjoy and how much they want to be naked, there comes a time when children's nudity needs to be limited, and there most definitely comes a time when a parent's nudity in front of the child needs to be limited. I know that there are some of you who are raising children in families where you're very openly nude and it's not an issue. I'm not talking about you, but I'm talking about families where you're not from a nudist colony sort of family, if you know what I mean. Because the reality is, experts agree that there does come a time when opposite gender children should no longer be seeing their parents naked. Regardless of your own comfort level with nudity, this remains the case. Why is that? Because sometimes it can be overstimulating to a child, make a child uncomfortable, cause issues that you might even not be able to see. And so we know that there comes a time when we avoid any of those possibilities by suggesting that parents cover up in front of their kids. In deciding when you should cover up, there are usually 3 things that a parent weighs. Number 1, I think you should weigh your sense of your child's comfort in seeing you naked. You know what your child is like when that happens. When he ignores you and pays no attention to you, it's no big deal. But you will see that somewhere around the age of 4, your child seeing you naked brings on a whole different child, and he may begin to look at you like, and make you feel like you would like to disappear a bit. That's a good hint that the time to cover up has arrived. The second thing is whatever hunch you have about what seeing you naked might mean to that child. And the third thing to consider is your family's history with nudity, as I alluded to before. There comes a time when nudity, as I said, becomes overstimulating and in fact inappropriate for children. And again, let me stress, I'm talking about opposite gender children to parent, parent to child. I'm not talking about same gender, because I feel like you can get in the hot tub and take a bath with your daughter moms as long as you want, and dads with your sons. But there does come a time when dad getting in the bathtub or the shower nude with his daughter and vice versa should be over. Generally speaking, experts, people who do what I do, feel that around the age of 4 years old is the age for opposite gender parents to cover up. And if you're not going to cover up, to suggest that your child allow you privacy when you get dressed. Now that doesn't mean when your child comes in the room you start going, don't look. It means she walks in the room and you calmly turn around. You grab a towel, you say, I'd like some privacy while I'm getting dressed. Don't make a big deal of it, but kind of casually cover up when that child is around. There's another way, another slight rule that we use, and that's what I call the eye level rule. When your opposite gender child is eye level with your genitals, it's time to cover up. because for a little girl, seeing a man's penis eye to eye is a very loaded view. So that's also indicative, unless you have a very tall child, of the time at which it's time to cover up. Again, I stress, this is not the case with same-gender parents. But the opposite gender parent needs to be a little bit more careful about that. Let's talk about nudity and bathing with siblings, because it's kind of on the same topic, isn't it? I think it's perfectly fine to bathe your opposite gender siblings together, children together, for a pretty long time, until about the age of 7 years old. And certainly same gender can go on bathing together until there's not enough room in the tub for both of them, or in my case, triplets, all of them. But it seems to be that somewhere around the age of 7 is when bathing together stops. But you'll know, and we're again talking about opposite gender siblings, because when the bathing together devolves into silliness or touching or what I call inappropriate behavior, and I'm not fond of the word inappropriate, but you know what I'm talking about, right? When it devolves into that, that's the time to stop. If your kids are 7 or 8 and they're still not even noticing one another's genitals, I mean literally not noticing or touching or making comments, you can go on until you have the feeling that it's over. But most 7-year-olds at some point are likely to say to you, I want my privacy. They'll demand having their own baths. And that would be a good hint for you. It's time to stop, either then or when it gets out of hand. When it comes to bathing with peers, certainly the same gender peers can bathe together. But there will come a time when it may get out of hand also, if it gets too wild or too silly, and you know that same gender kids, elementary school age children, often play doctor or play mommy and daddy. Your peers on play dates can certainly bathe together if they are the same gender until it's no longer okay, and you'll know when that is. Opposite gender kids on play dates, I think it's the same rule as siblings, probably younger. I think when those children enter elementary school, kindergarten age is when the bathing together should stop. But likewise, when your kids are on play dates, as long as we're talking about nudity, it's important for you to know that on play dates, the rule of thumb is clothing stays on. This is going to be the best way for you to avoid playing doctor and pretending to be mommy and daddy and whatever else they might come up with, whether they're same gender or opposite gender. Clothing stays on in play dates, and by the way, doors always stay open. Got it? Okay, let's move on.